Hey everybody, this is Dominic D'Angelo, WrestleZone.com. Today's date is December 21st, 2020. And I'm happy to have with me here today Michael Dockins, known as the Gimmick Attorney.
Yes, sir.
Just started up, it's a couple months ago. It's a once-a-month podcast on ad-free shows, Wrestling with the Law. And Michael, thanks for joining me. You're the second wrestling attorney I've had on an interview here.
Well, how about that?
Yeah.
I feel so special.
Right. Well, I want to start off just basic stuff. So, I listened to the first episode or most of it, and then, but you didn't give a whole lot of background of you yourself as like a wrestling fan and like just somebody that's into the business and has been a fan growing up. So give me some background on how you became a wrestling fan, and then we'll talk about some other fandom stuff too coming up.
Sure. I've been a wrestling fan since I was a little kid, like most people, I think. And I don't remember exactly how I first got into it. I think it was a family friend who was big into wrestling. Like I went to his house and he had trading cards or something, and just started watching it along with him, and then got hooked. And from there, it was, anytime there was a Saturday night's main event or one of these, was just on it, right? Saturday mornings, I lived for it. Anything that was on TV, I consumed. And my folks got separated when I was pretty young, and so I was at my dad's most weekends, or at least every other weekend, and he had TBS and this sort of thing. So then I got introduced to WCW and NWA.
Yeah.
And I just remember as a kid all the time going with my mom or whatever to the grocery store. She'd be going and getting groceries, and I'd go to the magazine aisle, and I'd be rifling through wrestling magazines and would buy some and take them home. So just started as a kid, right? And just always kind of stuck with it. And I think like most people, I got a little older and kind of fell out of it a little bit, but I always kept tabs on it, right? I wasn't a zealot, but I kept tabs. And I would say probably back when I got to law school, and I'm in an apartment by myself, got friends and stuff, but just had more time by myself versus having roommates in college. Kind of got back into it on television. And one of my biggest regrets is that WrestleMania was in Detroit, and I live in Toledo, which is like a 45-minute drive from Detroit.
Oh, that's it.
And I didn't go.
Wow.
And I didn't have anybody to go with. Like right now, I wouldn't care. Like if I went by myself, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Whether I'm by myself or not. But back then I'm like, man, I can't. Like, I'm not going to go to a movie by myself. I'm not going to go to a wrestling event by myself. And I hate it. I hate that I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Just got back into it. And there always, when DVRs became a thing, it made it very easy and much easier to track. And, always with DVR, it still do. And, when I have time, kind of fast forward and skip through, but I'm able to keep up with the storylines. So, it's wild how it's turned into like a big part of my career and not just a hobby. And it was truly, I remember what happened. I remember the day. I remember everything about it. Is I talked to my wife a little bit about it. I'm like, hey, I see all these stories about wrestlers who don't own their names or lost the right to their name, or how WWE's kind of pushing them around. And I just don't think these guys know what they don't know. And it'd be really cool if I could get myself into that and start helping people, something I know about and I'm passionate about.
Yeah, exactly. Blend your two hobby, well, not hobby, but your career and a hobby together.
Yeah. And so she's like, well, do it. You should, give it a try. What's the plan? What are you going to do? It's like, I don't know. I'm just going to throw as much at the wall as I can and see what sticks. Like I'll start going to the local Northwest Ohio shows and meet some people and try helping them and do some work maybe for some local guys. And I'll even do it for free. And, they can cover their filing fees and government charges and all that. But I will do some work for free because it's a word of mouth business. And I know that they'll tell their friends who are going to tell their friends. And eventually it'll spread and kind of build up. And so I started doing that. And I did some work for some local guys and didn't charge them much for it. And at the same time, there were shows in Fort Wayne, Heroes and Legends. Shout out to anybody who knows that show. And hooked up with the promoter for that and talked to him about it. I was like, hey, what if I got my firm to co-sponsor some events? Like, can I get some access to the guys and kind of inform about trademarks and IP? So, because Heroes and Legends would bring in new guys, kind of up and comers, like Should Be. I knew about him well before he ever wrestled.
Oh, wow, seriously, yeah.
And they also bring in legends, Heroes and Legends, right? And so it's like, it'll be a good mix. It'll be a good blend. And so we did that, got the firm back, and he said, it sounds like they're underrepresented. Let's do this. So did that, and that made some inroads, and went to Vegas with my buddies on a guys trip. And as guys tend to do on guys trips in Vegas, like, hey, we need to go to a strip club. And I was like, all right, well, if we're going to go to the one that's run by the Godfather. because
Just so you know.
because I'm gonna meet him and see if that can't do something. They're like, all right, whatever. So we go and we get a table and we're there 5 minutes, something like that. And he walks by and I'm like, hey, Charles. And he stops and we start talking. And he walks away to do something. I'll be right back. I'll be right back. He leaves and he comes back and I stand up and we start talking. And he's like, hey, actually, we were talking about his Hall of Fame ring.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, it's kind of chintzy. It's like a class ring, but I got some diamonds put in it. And they really give you these cool belt plates, like the side plates, like the circular side plates.
Yeah.
Yeah. They give you some things like that. He's like, they're actually in my office. You want to go to my office? I'm like, yeah. So the Godfather and I go to his office at the strip club, and I was probably back there like an hour, just bullshitting with him, talking, hanging out, talking stories and whatever. And he was going to be in Detroit again in my backyard, and so I was like, hey, I think you're going to be in Detroit next month. Like, you want to get together? Like, you want to go grab dinner or something? Because doing these convention things got to be boring just sitting in hotels. He's like, yeah, here's my number. So I'm like, all right, literally, I'm throwing everything at the wall to try to make it stick. I'm like, all right, well, now I've got a WWE Hall of Famer that I'm getting friendly with, and this could lead to something. But the one that really got me was I work out on Mondays and Wednesdays, and I got home from my workout and got all cleaned up and everything, and I'm laying on the couch, fast forwarding through Raw like I do. The kids are in bed, the wife's taking a shower, getting ready, and something popped up in my mind about StarCast. Mm-hmm. And I think it was either right before or right after the first one. I think it was right before the first one. And I was like, I wonder if Conrad, who I didn't know personally, but certainly listened to all the podcasts, I wonder if he's protected his IP. I wonder if he protected his trademark in this. So I'm on my phone and I'm looking and doing the research. So I'm like, well, I'll be damned, he hasn't. Why not shoot for the moon? Let's see what happens. And so I sent him a DM, because he keeps his DMs open on Twitter.
He does. Yes, he does. Yeah.
I'm laying on the couch after working out, and the wife's doing her thing, and I reached out to Conrad. Like, hey, we're the same age. We grew up on the same stuff. I'm a trademark attorney and patent attorney and intellectual property and all these things. You probably already have a guy, and if you do, great. But if you ever have questions, I listen to all the podcasts, and I'm happy to answer them and be a friendly voice that's not somebody who's charging you by the minute. Yeah. And so I would say like 30 seconds later, I got a DM back from him. He's like, hey, thanks for listening to the show. It's interesting that you're timing on this, because I just reached out to a guy locally recently to get some proposals and estimates. Like, I'd love to get one from you.
Whoa.
And I said, oh, okay. Well, what's the best email? What's the best way to reach you? And so he sent me his email, and I tweeted him and sent him text messages. I'm like, here's the thumbnail sketch of what I would do and generally what it would cost. But I'll send you a detailed proposal tomorrow. So next morning, came into work, put together a detailed proposal about, I think he had 4 podcasts at the time.
Yeah.
And like, here's what you have. Here's the different classes of goods and services I think you could cover. Here's the cost. And, I'd love to help you out if you want to move forward. And so he wrote back and was like, hey, thanks for this. I'll look at it. I'll get back in touch. And I didn't hear anything from him for a couple weeks. And then a couple weeks went by, I still hadn't heard anything. So I sent it to him again. I'm like, hey, I know how this goes with all my clients, not even at the time I didn't have wrestling clients, but it's going to fall to the bottom of your inbox. You forget about it. And so I'll just keep sending it to you periodically so that it goes back to the top of your inbox. And if at any point you're like, hey, stop bugging me, I'll stop bugging you. But until then, I'm going to keep doing this.
That's the way to do it, brother.
So that's what I did. Every few weeks, once a month, something like this. Hey, just bubbling this back up to the top of your inbox. Hope you're well. Talk to you soon. And nothing. Just kept moving it. And then finally, I want to say it was February or March. One day he calls me. He's like, hey, it's Conrad. I'm like, whoa, hi. He's like, I need to move on some of these. And so, that's that. I jumped on it and did the filings and got everything going on StarCast and some other things. And it was probably about a week in the interim. During the course of all that, I played soccer in grade school, middle school, high school, and a year in college. I broke my leg, and so I had to have a metal plate put in and blah blah blah. But the day that I went to the doctor to get clearance to drop the crutches and be able to walk like a normal person again, I was driving home because I was at the doctor, and he says, "Did you bring your other shoe?" I said, "Well, no, I just got the walking boot and the crutches." He's like, well, you're going to have to wear it home then, because you can drive, you can walk now. You can get your other shoe. And I'm like, oh, all right. So I drive home and I stop at a gas station and filling up with gas, and my phone pings. It's an email. I look at it and it's, hey, this hey, Mike, this is my friend, this is Mike. He needs some help with trademarks. I'm like, cool. And then I look, it was a shoot name, not a working name.
Yeah.
And I look at that, I'm like, oh, cool. And then I look up at the top of the email and it's his working name. And I was like, oh, it was a WWE guy. And I was like, holy shit. And so it just spiraled from there. And it's just word of mouth, you know, Conrad and ad-free shows and being mentioned on the pods and all these different things. It's just kind of grown. And, you know, now I've got quite a stable of wrestling clients. So like you said, like we started this, it was quite the marriage of career and hobby. And it's been a lot of fun. It's a lot less like work.
I bet it does. I bet it's like really satisfying too a lot of times when you're able to help talent out too in certain ways that they didn't have any knowledge in and stuff like that. I'm sure that's super duper rewarding too.
Oh, it is. And one of the things I love the most is when I'm told that something can't be done. Yeah. Because, well, I don't think he would mind me talking about it. We'll see. But Bruce Pritchard was told that they couldn't get the Brother Love registration because there was somebody out there blocking it. And I said, who told you that? Was it a trademark attorney or was it a business attorney? Or he's like, well, it's a business attorney, but you know, he does some trademark stuff. I'm like, okay, so it's not a trademark attorney. There's a lot of people who do trademark work and hold themselves out as trademark attorneys, but if it's not something you do regularly, if it's not something you're doing most of the time, you're not a trademark attorney. You just dabble. And I was like, well, I disagree with that. I think we can get it. And he's like, well, if you think so, you know, Conrad's got faith in you. I got faith in you. Go for it. And so he owns Brother Love now, you know, so it could be done. And that was the first one. I'm like, God damn, I love being right.
Now, did that make some sort of news? Because I think I heard something about that, I think.
It was, I don't know what prompted the various wrestling websites and magazines to start following trademark filings more. It used to not really make a lot of news. Yeah. And I don't remember that one making much news at all. It kind of snuck through. The first ones I remember really making the news, boy, who was it? I don't know, it's all happened so fast, I'm not sure, but I don't remember Brother Love one making it.
I know. Okay. No, because I remember too, like, well, I started WrestleZone here probably like 2.5 years ago now, but like probably about maybe like a few months in, that's when trademarks really started picking up, like, oh, hey, did you know this is happening? I'm like, wow. Like, and then I'm looking on the trademark websites and like trying to get all the details and stuff. And it's just like, wow, this is funky.
Yeah. One of the associates at my office the other day was telling me, he said, hey, it's wild, this stuff you're doing. I'm like, what? Like, he doesn't do trademark stuff. He's corporate, completely unrelated. He said, well, I keep Google alerts related to the firm. So anytime the firm is mentioned somewhere or, you know, hits the news wire in some fashion. And so I get hits all the time. He goes, I would say half the time it's you and the wrestling stuff you're doing. And the other half the time it's the rest of the firm. And I was like, oh, so you're getting it from like WrestleZones and you know, all these other things, you know, Ryan Satin's thing and all this. And he's like, yeah, all the time. It's stuff like, it's public information. So, you know.
Right. What are you going to do, huh?
It's available.
Yeah.
So, you're good for the firm, I guess, getting some pub.
Absolutely. Getting that buzz going. What, overall, how many, I mean, I don't know if you can disclose it. How many wrestlers in general do you, are your clients, would you say?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I would say it's probably at least 3 or 4 dozen.
Damn.
Yeah, I've got clients in pretty much all the major companies, right? AEW, WWE, Impact, MLW, GCW, Ring of Honor. I think that's it.
You're like you're almost like Jerry Lynn, the Jerry Lynn of wrestling.
Yeah, right. And I've likened it interestingly, and you know, I can thank Conrad and his network of podcasts and things for this, I think. But if you've heard him talk about David Flair, how David Flair says, I started at the stadiums and worked my way down to bingo halls and churches, right? Yeah. It was almost like the same thing for me. Like I started at the top where I'm getting WWE guys and AEW guys, like really well-known talent. And now it's kind of trickling down to some of the smaller companies. And now I'm getting calls and emails and texts from these guys like, hey, you know, I'd like some help if you can help me protect my gimmick and so on and so forth. So kind of the same thing. As I told my wife, I remember back to my story, I got up off the couch after DMing with Conrad and ran upstairs, you know, she's drying off or whatever. I'm like, I shot for the moon and I might have hit something. Like I might, like if Conrad's really well connected and really kind of doing some things in the wrestling space that others aren't with the podcasts and He's got all these StarCast. He's got all these things planned, and if I can get in there, like I think I'm gonna be okay. And Conrad and I became fast friends. Like he's a very good friend of mine now, and we talk and hang out and stuff regularly. But a year and what is it? Almost 2 years ago now, I could never have imagined. It's just grown and mushroomed, and it's crazy.
It's unbelievable. Like, yeah, just even being on the writing side of things and like covering stuff and like making all these connections and different, having all these different things. It's wild how like crazy it picks up, because never when I was like 13 watching wrestling, WCW, like NWO, all that bullshit, like I would have ever thought that like I would be doing something similar to this at all.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? It's there are times. There was a StarCast one time, the StarCast in Baltimore, where Conrad had gotten Sting and got him to do the surfer gimmick, right? The red, white, and blue to celebrate the Great American Bash. And that was quite the coup, because Sting did not, I don't want to say he didn't want to do it. He was nervous about it, and he was really self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
And I and other people who were kind of talking to him and hanging out with him the night before, like, oh, no, do not be well, the hair's not going to be the same thing. Nobody cares. Nobody's seen you in the surfer gimmick. Never mind the spiky hair or whatever. Nobody cares about that. Just the paint and the jacket, and you're going to have the big gold. Like, that's huge. People are going to love this. He's like, are you sure? I just don't want to look silly. And we're like, no, you look amazing. Anyway, so I went up to his room and helped bring him down, the back channels and got him into the building and stuff. And we walked by Megan, Conrad's wife. She was in the office doing some stuff, but she had known him for years, right?
Yeah, sure.
Flair, for Pete's sake. So she had known Sting for a long time. He stops, is like, oh, hey, Megan, good to see you. And they're talking. And we got done talking and doing whatever. And Sting went and did what he had to do. And she looked at me and she goes, does anything faze you? And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, wasn't he your favorite wrestler growing up? Like, he was everybody's favorite wrestler. I'm like, yeah, it was him and Hogan. Those were the two. She's like, but you're just like hanging out like he's any other person. I'm like, I mean, he is. On the inside, though, it's an entirely different world. Like, I'm just, whatever. It's just Steve Borden. He's, a nice guy, and which is true. But like on the inside, I'm freaking out.
I know. It's like
so cool.
Such an adjustment, man. Like, I know there's plenty of times where like it's just like you have your nerves or whatever, you get up, start talking to them, it's just people, and then you're just like, I'm doing my job, he's doing his, it's just part of it.
It's all good. Yeah, it's not that big of a deal. But after the fact, always after the fact, I sit back and I kind of pinch myself and I'm like, dude, how did this happen? Like, I'll be talking to the guys on our Ad Free Shows group chat or whatever, and we'll be talking about something. I'll be like, yeah, there was one time that Arn was at a local show, and we hooked up and, went and had dinner and stuff. And he's like, oh, I got to get a lift in tomorrow. I said, oh, me too. So I'm at the gym lifting weights with Arn Anderson. What? What just happened here? Like, how is this real? And
you're like, all right, Arn, see you later. And you're like walking away. You're like, wait a second. What the fuck did I just do?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
But it's been good fun, man. I enjoy it every day. And it'll always be something new. There's always something that somebody's stuck their foot in their mouth or stepped in some situation that they're not sure how to get out of. And I'm more than happy to help them get out of it and try to navigate the minefield that can be dealing with WWE or whomever.
Absolutely. And you know what? Like, that's kind of what leads me into your first episode that you conducted was about independent contracting. And it's always a fascinating and interesting topic, especially when it comes to WWE. And you picked it up at the right time, too, with Zelina Vega and all the news that broke around that time. And then, but you mentioned, too, on that episode that you and Conrad were talking about doing that for a while.
Yeah. The timing was purely circumstantial. He was like, hey, we with ad free and all this, we want it to look as great as we can. And I had some crappy camera that's built into my laptop, and he's like, we're going to send you, and he sent them to Arn and everybody, because as part of ad free, while it was initially just audio, it was like, we're going to start doing video. So we're going to, video pod 83 weeks and what happened when and all these things. And so we want all the extra content, Wrestling with the Wall to do that too. And so we'll send you a 4K camera and a light ring and all these things. And I'm like, oh, I can go buy it. He's like, no, we're buying it in bulk to send to everybody. So we'll send it to you. So Dave Silva sent me my stuff, and he sent at the same day. He went and sent it to everybody. He sent Tony some stuff. He sent Arn some stuff. He sent Bruce some stuff, whoever. And they all got their stuff in like 3 days. And me, it took like 14. somewhere between Huntsville and Northwest Ohio. It got lost in the mail.
Oh,
and so the episode was actually supposed to come out like a week prior, which would have happened before Zelina Vega.
Yeah.
But because of the mail in all of its glory, I got it late. And so I was like, well, this is probably a good thing because I can at least touch on that, and it's very timely.
Yeah, very timely. Absolutely. And, something that was cool about this episode is you put in clips of like John Oliver, who really made news about the independent contracting stuff from a mainstream standpoint. And then, but what you went into, what I thought was fascinating, was like you broke down about like what independent contractors are, and then what certain things could establish them as an employee or an independent contractor. And so you went through 20, I think it's the list of 20, is it?
Yep.
And when I was listening to it pretty earlier, right before I started interviewing you, and hearing them, it's like I had to like snicker out loud to myself because all of those sound like it fits the category of an employee.
Yeah. Well, when I first printed out the list and in the show notes, I provided the list that I like because it kind of is a checkbox. Other places you'll just see it listed out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I went through and I'm like, all right, I'm going to look at this objectively as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And in the light most favorable to WWE. And of the 20, 17 indicated employee and 3 indicated independent contractor.
Yeah. Unbelievable. And something I wrote this one down. Let's see if I can pull it up real quick. But did I write it? Okay, yeah. So you then talked about reasonable basis.
Mm-hmm.
Reasonable basis treating workers like like their worker or independent contractors. And so long-standing recognized practice of a significant segment of the industry. Something WWE's established for a very long, and that's kind of, it seems like they're big out.
Yeah.
But from that standpoint, though, like, couldn't there be just some sort of big argument made in favor to those talents that are there, and being like what would need to necessarily happen for that, just to create more of a wavelength of what's happened? Because I know Andrew Yang made mentions of it, all that stuff. What more needs to go to that for that?
So the problem you have is it's one of those be careful what you wish for because you might get it sort of situations, right? Mm-hmm. Because there very much is a significant cost difference for being an employee versus being a contractor for WWE.
Okay.
And they're not going to make less money, right? So where do those dollars come from? And I think I mentioned the way I would see it working is you're going to have a much smaller go-home paycheck because you have so much more going to benefits and all that. Now, for some people, I think I would probably prefer that, right? I want the health insurance. I want to make sure my wife and kids are covered. I want a 401k because one day this goes away and at least I've got some retirement nest egg. And it helps people save them from themselves, right? To have that money being kind of pushed back there for you. So if the talent want to be treated as employees, they need to understand that they're going to get some benefits, but they're going to lose some things as well. And when you're an employee, there's less discretionary dollars to be thrown around. Like, man, you had a hell of a match last night at TLC, Bray Wyatt. You got set on fire. So we're going to give you a $50,000 bonus. Like, that's not going to happen as an employee. So you got to be careful about what you ask for. And I think you're going to have a divide in the locker room. And my personal opinion is that divide is going to be the haves and the have-nots. So it's going to be the top of the card, and then everybody else, or the top and middle top on the way down, are gonna be different in what they think. And without the buy-in of almost everybody, or the ability to have the top lean on the bottom, or vice versa, you're just not going to get a consensus. And that's why I think if it's going to happen, it almost has to happen from the IRS side or the NLRB side, where it's taking it out of well, Heath Slater's not there, but a Heath Slater type, be like, you're at the bottom of the card, you're fired because you raised this as an issue and you're causing a stink in the locker room. Like, what do they care? They wouldn't fire Roman Reigns if he raised it as an issue.
Yeah.
But he's not going to do that, right? Because he's got the benefit. It's just like Hogan and Ventura when it came up in the early 80s, which was a very different world then. So Hogan's position, he's put as the heel in this whole thing. He's not. Back then, they probably really were independent contractors. Guys would come into the WWE or WWF, I guess at the time, for 6 months, and then leave, and then come back 6 months later. And they could go and do, you hear about it all the time. If you watch the Dark Side of the Ring episode about Jimmy Snuka, talking about, well, these WWF guys were here in this town doing this kind of spot show for this promoter who was friendly with Vince because this promoter fed them underneath guys and enhancement talent.
Sure.
They used to do that stuff, and they used to do it a lot, and that very much leans itself towards independent contractor. That's just not the reality anymore. It's just not the way it is. And so I think you've got guys who are afraid of what would happen if they kind of are a whistleblower, for lack of a better term. They're not technically a whistleblower, but if they were drawing attention to this, they're going to get fired, right? And they make a good living doing what they're doing. And so I think that's what has to happen, is it has to come from somewhere outside of the talent. If the talent can't all agree together, they can't fire everybody, right? So if you have the entire roster come together, right, that's kind of a union. They're not going to fire them all.
No. And so would you say too, from your experience of like dealing with clients maybe that are in WWE or that worked for WWE, would you say there is that certain divide of like a lot of them feel one way about it? Like, hey, I'm comfortable with how we are right now, like getting paid and stuff like that. But then there's this other section. Is there certainly a distinguishable section for that?
I wouldn't say that there's a distinguishable section with respect to contractor, independent contractor, independent contractor employee. I've never really had that conversation with anybody, but I can say, I think anybody I've talked to, client or otherwise, they all feel very much like they're not in control of anything. Okay. That it's just, here's where you're going to be, here's what you're going to do. And, we're not going to use you, just stay home. And these guys want to perform, right? They like being out in front of a crowd and doing what they do. It seems to be universally at some point, just getting a paycheck isn't enough.
Yeah.
And they want to flex their creative muscle and whatever.
That's
that
why
I think is pretty universal.
Wrestlers do it, is for that creative, they're creative people. And they're talented in the ring, they're athletic and creative. So you go into that because you aspire to do something big. And
right. And I think that's why you've got guys that are at AEW and places like that who keep talking in the interviews and whatever they're doing, talking to wrestling magazines and websites about how happy they are. And I think that has a lot to do with it. They have a little more control over their creativity. I think Tony Khan, at the end of the day, will say yes or no, but I think the path to yes is much easier than it is with Vince.
Very much seems that way, yeah.
And they can also go out and do, Joey Janela spring break and things like that. You can do some stuff on the side. With COVID, they've had to pull back that a little bit, and probably rightfully so.
Absolutely, yeah.
But they are able to flex their creative muscle and have some independence, and so that's why in that episode when I talked about it, I'm like, look, it's going to sound like I'm picking on WWE. That's not intentional. I'm not. But the fact of the matter is, their contracts are very different from everybody else's contracts, and you're not allowed to moonlight other places. And that to me is a huge, huge distinction that creates that difference between, AEW and those guys probably are still independent contractors, at least to some extent. And for WWE, boy, I don't know if they have been. I don't think they have been for a long time.
Right. No, I agree, man. And would you say, too, when it comes to the talent, when those big releases happened around April and, everybody, 15 or whatever it was, got released. I almost said eliminated like a battle royal.
We all got thrown over the top.
We got thrown over the top out of WWE. So obviously there's that 90-day no compete clause stuff. And I've always kind of been just very think about it, like legally, like there's maybe that contract situation, obviously, but from the standpoint of the wrestler, where it's like, well, I am an independent, you could kind of make a case for being an independent contractor. What's to withhold somebody to be just like, say like Rusev when he got released, and now Miro, and he was just like, you know what? I want to show up and make a real big bomb on AEW. I'm doing it like 10 days after I got released or whatever it may be. What is holding them back from doing that? Is it just more of that legal standpoint? Would that be something that's even feasible for somebody to do, technically, a wrestler, and still have a good case for it?
Yeah, so, the non-compete is kind of separate and independent from contractor status or not, right? It's just another term that people can agree to as part of their contract to what's restricting them, right? And for non-competes, the legal standard, generally speaking, is it has to be reasonable in time period and geographic scope, and then the scope of what it's restricting you from, right? So I can't say, Dom, you can't do any writing anywhere all over the world for the rest of time, right? No, not likely. But you kind of start balancing those three things, and it's okay. You can't do wrestling writing, and you can't do that all over the world, but for 3 months, or in the US, but for 6 months. It's kind of a balance of what all is being restricted, because particularly in this day and age, courts are kind of loath to tell people you can't have a job doing what you're trained to do.
Right.
And for non-competes, it very much is different if you are a high-level executive. If you're the Eric Bischoff running the company, he could have a much more restrictive non-compete because he was kind of the secret sauce, or at least person turning all the dials and doing this sort of thing. But for the talent, they have to be reasonable in scope and duration and restrictiveness. But that's just something you agree to. Now, the real question is, do they actually agree to that, or do they have to agree to that? And they have to agree to that because they can't, well, I can't say they can't. Most guys that I've talked to are just happy to get what they can get when they get it, right? I got a contract doing what I love. I'm not going to sit here and negotiate.
Yeah.
But they don't really have much power to negotiate. It's more or less take it or leave it.
Yeah.
With WWE. So they don't have much bargaining power as much as WWE tries to say, well, these were freely entered into and negotiated. Well, there's not really any negotiations. It's just, here's the contract, and you might be able to tweak a few small things. That isn't one of them.
Yeah.
So there are, certainly talents who have been released, and it was an immediate release.
Yeah.
But that was part of the negotiation of their release, not necessarily part of their contract, because their contract would have the 90-day.
Okay. So for clarification, negotiation is where like it can get shady, but once it's committed, once they sign the contract, that's a completely separate thing from the independent contract, and WWE could still, like, without any like question, lay the hammer down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And even if you have what you deem as an unreasonable non-compete, if you sign the contract, they have an enforceable contract until you have it thrown out, until you have it negated or rewritten by the courts. So you're going to sue WWE to say, well, this is an unreasonable, unenforceable non-compete.
Yeah.
Who's going to do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You ride out the 90 days and do your thing.
Makes it much more easier. Just live it out. That's just, yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
And if they are not shy with lawsuits, right? So you could say, well, I'm going to breach it, but from what I know, all companies ask talent, hey, one, are you free? I think Bruce has even talked about this on their podcast. Can you even talk to me? Like, are you in this window where you're allowed to talk to me and negotiate? No. Goodbye. Talk to you later. Call me when you're ready. Yeah. And so if that's kind of the first thing to ask. Okay, are you in that window? Okay, yes, great. We can keep talking. Then I don't want to get a tampering or tortious interference with contracts sort of situation on my hands. So, all right, you can talk to me now. What's your non-compete look like? And that's not a non-starter, but they're not going to bring you in and then violate that, because they know, sure, they could surprise the world and have somebody come in prior to their 90 days. They're going to get hammered with a lawsuit. Okay. And they're going to get hammered by, Titan, and Titan is a Titan. So
they got a name for a reason like that.
And it's kind of, well, we are, the damage is done, right? So the damage is done. You've already debuted, surprised the world, big shock, did it for your non-compete. So now they're out for blood and money.
Yeah.
Right? That's because the cat's already out of the bag. There's nothing they can do to take that back. So it can't be just an injunction. Now, you might get an injunction. The courts could say, all right, you're going to have to pay these money damages, wrestler and or wrestling company. But also, because you jumped the gun by 20 days, you can't use them for the next 20 days or 40 days to kind of make up for what you shouldn't have had.
Oh, I see. Okay. Wow. Yeah. See, no, that was something that always fascinated me, because I'm like, well, geez, if they're being like, if there's that question of like, if they're contracted or if they aren't, like, what's the, like, I know there could be repercussions, but I'm like, geez, I'm surprised more wrestlers don't do that, just to like stick their thumb back at WWE. Like, hey, I'm going to do what I want now, that kind of thing.
Can you imagine being a guy who makes, $200,000, $300,000 a year getting sued by a multi-billion-dollar company?
That's rough time right there.
One that, and I want to say vindictive, and I don't mean it as it sounds, but they will flex on people because they can.
Yeah.
And because they are staunch defenders of their IP and staunch defenders of their rights. So it's not really vindictive. It's doing what companies have the right to do. They just get painted with this villain brush. You can't take that on. I advise clients, wrestling or otherwise, every day about, and they're probably tired of hearing me say it, but I'm like, look, there's two sides to this. There's the legal side, and then there's the practical side. Mm-hmm. The legal side is, boy, you're right. Like, we could absolutely take on that pharmaceutical company because they're doing this, that, or the other. The practical side is they're a lot richer than you are, and that sucks. That you're kind of in this position where you can't do anything when you've been wronged because this is big, wealthy company. But that's reality. It's an unfortunate reality. And I remember in law school, one of our civil procedure professors saying, look, the justice system is a misnomer. There is no justice in the justice system. You should never say that. No one should ever claim it. The justice system, all it does is provide you an opportunity and mechanisms to challenge something, right?
Yeah.
Rules and procedures. It's your chance to have due process. Now, even that due process gets violated. You hear that all the time. So even then, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you due process. How many people have been railroaded and put in jail for crimes they didn't commit because of their race or gender or whatever? It happens all the time. So there is no justice in the justice system, and people need to not think that way, because it's just, I mean, maybe I'm being a pessimist or a cynic, but it's not reality.
I think it's pretty accurate, though.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is.
Yeah, right. You don't want to get mixed up in it, but that's just kind of accurate. Yeah, unfortunately. As far as like when you're discussing creative property with the talent, and what is the biggest, what's like the most important thing you usually try to convey to them, especially if, say, there's a wrestler. I'm going to use Daniel Bryan as an example. Obviously, his name's Daniel Bryan. His name's Bryan Danielson. So like that kind of thing. So his name gets altered, everything like that. There's always that question of like their own property. You look at Cody and Cody Rhodes and all that stuff that comes into play. When they're kind of trying to deal with that stuff, how do you advise them in certain ways when it comes to their name and their creative license, so to speak?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, because WWE is very much, it's usually who we're talking about, not just AEW. They've got the longest history compared to the rest of these companies. So
usually a lot of my questions will probably pertain, to them.
They've got an interesting take on IP at times. They can be pretty staunch defenders, but they actually let a lot of things kind of slide and go that they don't necessarily have to, right? Because for trademark infringement, it's the similarity of the marks and the relatedness of the goods. That's generally very 10,000 foot level, the test. Mm-hmm. So this is the company that said, hey, we want to use Rhino with a Y because you've been using Rhino with an I, and that's different enough.
Yeah.
And like, he didn't know any better and kind of went along with it. That's not the law. That's not right. That is absolutely infringing on his Rhino with an I, but they went along with it, and he went along with it. Because phonetics matter, right? It doesn't matter if you have a Z instead of an S. Yeah. It is still trademark infringement. So it's not as easy as we'll just change one letter. No, not at all. Like if I came along and I started calling myself Bulk Hogan or Bulk Bogan, that's infringement, right? Yeah. There's no way I could win that if Terry Bollea wanted to challenge me, because I'm pretty sure he owns it. So it's tricky, right? And that's what I always, I give that disclaimer all the time. And what questions I ask are, okay, when did you start using it? Were you under contract with WWE? And that's, we go from there. Because they have let some stuff kind of go that maybe might have been used under their, when they had somebody under contract, because it's not something they're ever going to exploit. It was a lower tier guy or an NXT guy or however they want to classify it. They've just let it slide through. But then other people, it's more important and it means more.
Yeah.
But first use is what matters. That's the test, right? Registration is not the key thing about trademarks. What's key is the first to use. Oh. The reason you get registrations is you get nationwide coverage, you get nationwide constructive notice, you get the ability to become incontestable. You get all these very good benefits, and there's good reason to do it, because really in the grand scheme, it's not that expensive to get a trademark registration. But use is what matters. And so if somebody used their trademarks and used them before they went to WWE, you hear all the time, well, they changed my name because they want it to be something they own. But if you are an established star, if you are AJ Styles and you popped off because you were with Impact and New Japan and all these things, like, they're not going to rebrand AJ Styles. That would have been foolish.
That would have been, awful.
So he owns his trademarks, right? Because he used it first. And in their contracts, there's always a thing in there about WWE or company intellectual property, and there's something about wrestler intellectual property. And you're allowed to carve out, these are the things I own. This was my stuff before I ever came here. And intellectual property for them and for most wrestling contracts includes a lot of things. So it's not only your name and your slogans, but potentially also your tights and color combinations and hand gestures and face paint and anything that you could look at and determine, oh my gosh, that's referring to Daniel Bryan. Like if you just put a beard on a shirt and you knew it was in the wrestling context, you probably know it was him, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Depending on the shape of it, like maybe Braun Strowman or somebody like that. But there are things you can do like that would be somebody else's likeness or something that's reminiscent of them. And they own all that. So you're allowed to carve all that out. This is my stuff. And this is what I had beforehand. Now, they also, of course, give themselves the ability to file and protect on your behalf the IP that you didn't have registered. So they will get an AJ Styles, and I don't think this is true for him, but they'll get an AJ Styles and it'll be in the name of WWE. And so when AJ leaves the company, he has to then get a hold of him and say, hey, give me my stuff back, which I've done for a number of clients. And they've been great. They're not difficult to deal with in that regard. It's like, hey, per the contract, this is stuff we pre-owned and you guys registered and please assign it back. And they've been great about it, quite frankly. Like I said, I'm not here to vilify them, even though they are the evil empire. They're not. They are oftentimes very friendly and easy to work with.
Yeah, they say because you definitely. I mean, from social media, or mainstream like news point of view, it's definitely like they get vilified quite a bit. But I mean, I guess that would go for any big corporation or
sometimes fairly.
Sure.
I'm not here to lick their boots. Sometimes fairly.
Yeah,
sometimes very accurately, but not every time.
As far as so this kind of branches into the next question too. Something that's happened is that WWE filed a trademark for the collective, and obviously GCW has used that, and as it's been heavily promoted too on the independent scene. How did that? Can you maybe explain in some sort of term that what's the legalities of that, and who's that lean in favor of more?
Yeah, so you probably haven't listened to my second episode of Wrestling with the Law.
Yeah,
but it's about intellectual property specifically. So I touched on patents and trademarks and copyrights and right of publicity. All that's kind of intellectual property stuff, and goes back to the trademark side of things, which is first use wins. Right. And so unless WWE can show that they were using the collective before GCW was, which as far as I know, they had their first tickets go on sale more than 2 years ago. Unless they can show they were using first, they won't win. Yeah. So it's again, the legal side and the practical side. Will they put up a big fight about this and force GCW to fight them in the trademark office about it? Maybe they might, and maybe they win that way because they've just got more money. There's the no justice side of it. My experience is they would not do that.
Okay.
That they would. They might not know anything about GCW, right? I very much think that they take the position of if it's not WWE, it doesn't matter, and they keep an eye on AEW now, of course, because that's clearly their biggest competition, national TV, weekly, pay-per-views, quarterly, that sort of thing. But I'd be surprised if they've got their fingers on the pulse of independent wrestling. I would say that it would surprise me if they had done a clearance search, which is something I recommend folks do. There's good strategy reasons not to do a clearance search. If you want to be willfully blind to things that are happening, and you can say and then sign the declarations that you have to sign on a trademark application that says, hey, I think I have a right to use this, and I'm not aware of anything that would conflict with it. Sure. So there's a good reason for them not to do that sort of clearance search. Maybe the only search they do is within the trademark office database and not unregistered uses or common law uses, we would call it, because then you find every Tom, Dick, and Harry promotion all over God's creation that maybe has been using the collective where you would be questionable about whether or not you can file for it yourself. So I'll just figure out what I have actual notice of or can have. You get constructive notice through the trademark database. Look at that. Hey, there's no collective there. And so we'll go ahead and file for it. Maybe we're the first to use it. Maybe we're not. But if nobody raises their hand, we'll get it.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. That makes plenty sense.
So they have to show that they used prior to GCW. If they don't, then at least legally speaking, they won't get it.
Okay. And I think a big thing too is a lot of this time it seems like a really petty move. Like WWE's known to be petty.
Of course.
Yeah. You've seen it many times, whether it's, with CM Punk and different things like that. And yeah, like you said too, they rightfully get criticized in certain ways for that too. So like when it comes to that stuff and that, did you think overall, I guess, from the perspective of almost the underdog, is that something that the underdog can almost use in their favor? Like if they're like that kind of reputation that WWE has, can the underdog of it, we'll say for example, just some regular Joe Schmo independent promotion, they're using this, they're just being petty because we're making waves with it. Is that a case they can kind of make? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the court of public opinion, and really it comes down to what mood are they in. I mean, really, it's, do we want to push back and be spiteful, or do we want to do business? And my experience is, I've heard stories before I can get into that. I've heard stories where folks had some IP issues with them and went to them like, hey, I don't know if you knew about this, but I've been wrestling under this name for a long time, and I see you guys have this person on TV that's got this name. This is a problem, and it goes away by a check or another way, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily make news that, hey, I sent him a cease and desist. If you do it quietly and do it professionally, it might work out better in your favor rather than going to the court of the public opinion and trying to embarrass them.
Yeah.
Is how it might be viewed. I've seen him go both ways, right? I've seen him be very generous and very easy to work with, and I've seen him dig their heels in and, absolutely be somewhat unreasonable about things.
Sure,
so
yeah.
It just depends, really.
Yeah.
And if people go to them respectfully and approach them in a good business fashion, not a stomp on the ground, pissing in the wind sort of way, you'll probably do a little better. My personal experience with them is they will not admit that they're wrong. Mm-hmm. It just kind of goes away.
Yeah.
So
would you say that comes from the top? Like it just like that Vince mentality of?
I'm sure it does. Yeah. I mean, they have a policy of when both parties have to sign a contract, WWE will not sign it first.
Really? What?
Will not sign it first.
How?
The other side has to sign it first.
That's wild.
Yeah, that kind of stuff doesn't bother me. I've had calls with people there, and they're like, well, here's what we're going to do, and here's how it's going to work out. And it's all, great. It works out for everybody, or it works out for my client. And then they'll spend, 45 seconds motherfucking me about something. Like, I mean, if that makes you feel better, I don't care. I mean, ultimately, we got to the resolution that made at least us happy, or makes everybody happy. But
sure.
I don't know why you feel the need to do that, or making me sign first. But hey, if it makes you feel better, sure, let's do it.
You got it.
You do you.
Yeah. Right.
It's wild. It's just weird. I'd say it's petty. There might be a good reason for it that I don't know about the signing first thing. But I don't care. It just doesn't matter to me.
It's either way, like the contract's ultimately probably going to get signed unless like somebody makes a big stink about it.
I haven't not seen it get signed when I've had to do something and we had to have it signed first. Yeah. I've not seen it get countersigned and returned and everything, shake hands and go our separate ways.
Yeah. As far as, let's see, have you met Jerry McDivitt at all? Is he?
I've not met him, but I've certainly talked to him.
You've certainly talked to him. Okay. How is? I mean, he's got such a reputation too, like almost being like impossible to like get back, not get back at, but kind of best in a way, I suppose. How's your relationship with him overall? And then what would you say has his reputation preceded him in a lot of ways, I guess? Of being a good lawyer. Yeah.
He's fun. Like he's a nice guy and would be, good to hang out with and have a beer with and trade war stories with. Like I've got nothing but good feelings about Jerry. He's clearly knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. He clearly knows what Vince wants and how, WWE thinks and generally their philosophy. And he's got a massive firm behind him. So even if it's something that Jerry couldn't or wouldn't handle himself, he's got a team of great lawyers at a great reputable firm to back him up. So it's a great place for WWE to be and have their backs. But no, I've not had bad interactions with Jerry by any means.
Yeah, no, anything that stories I've heard, I think have been pretty mostly positive, like especially from personal experience, like you, that kind of thing. So,
yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll let you go to some of these. you mentioned that you had dinner with Arn and stuff like that. I was gonna ask you, one of my like closing questions was, out of all the Conrad's umbrella of hosts and co-hosts and stars, who would you want to be on a road trip with the most, and where would you go to eat? I asked Arn this kind of too when I interviewed him.
So if we're sticking within the family, Conrad's family of people, I'm trying to think. I think I've had meals and multiple meals and drinks with all of them.
Yeah.
And they've all got fun and interesting stories in their own different way. Who would I want to most? Well, that's tricky. It would depend on what mood I was in, because like hanging out with Tony is truly like hanging out with your uncle. Like people call him Uncle Tony. Yeah. Right? He's got great stories, but he was very much, hey, I show up and I do my job and move on. Like he wasn't knee deep in all the politics. So, you've heard Conrad talk about, well, when we did What Happened When, initially we were going to have it be like Bruce's, where we do a deep dive on a individual wrestler or an individual show. And Tony just wasn't involved at that level. And so we had to switch to kind of a watch along and, let's have fun. So yeah. Tony would be, and Tony's a wheelman, right? Tony likes to drive. So I ain't mad at that either. Arn's got great stories and is fun to hang out with. He's a little more guarded. JR has been at the top and the bottom and everywhere in between, and he's got fascinating stories. Oh my gosh, yeah. I might have to leave. It'd be JR or Bruce, I think. Same with Bruce, obviously, being at the right hand of God for as many years as he has. It would have to be one of those. I think I'd lean towards Bruce, and for no reason in particular. But like I said, I've hung out with Eric and had meals with him. So Bruce likes red wine and vodka, and I think he enjoys a good steak. So we'd probably find a great steakhouse and have some drinks and have a jolly good time.
Hell yeah, man. No, I mean, even so I was at the first Starcast and I saw the roast of Bruce Pritchard. I thought the best thing of the show, the whole event, the whole weekend was that. And then, just interacting like with JR and like hearing the podcast and how him and Conrad interact. All these guys have such unique and outstanding personalities that it's like you would want to hang out with any of them for a good amount of time.
Yeah, I think I would pick Bruce because I've spent the least amount of one-on-one time with Bruce.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time with JR and Tony and Eric and Arn. So just because I don't have quite this, I've talked to him a million times, right? We've had plenty of phone conversations, but I've just not hung out with him much in person. So I think it would definitely be Bruce. And it would be fun to kind of like Conrad does, just call him out on shit. Be like, that's bullshit. That can't be true. and just go back and forth and snipe at each other in a fun way. I think it'd be a blast.
Yeah, no, that's what's great about those shows too. Is Conrad, he doesn't pull any punches. If they
and he's got such a great relationship with them.
Oh my gosh, that's what's so great about it. Is like you see that, you hear it.
Yeah, and the whole thing that he's done with ad free and with all this is tremendous, because it came from that place of love, right? Conrad, like I said, he and I are the same age and grew up watching the same stuff, and I think you can tell when you listen to the podcast. And so being the way he is, entrepreneurial and always firing off ideas, and we all kind of spitball stuff and ping pong it back and forth, is what do people want to listen? Like, what can we do that folks want to listen to, that they want to experience, and not seem like it's being forced? Like, who are good personalities? Could we get Rebel and Hooker with Corey Ryan Forrester and, have a good time, and they get along swimmingly? And so it works, right? It works because the right personalities are together talking or doing the right things. And I think more time and planning goes into that than people realize. But the idea is, let's give more content than anybody can handle. That's Conrad came to me and was like, all right, hear me out. That's how he always starts with something. That's always like, here we go.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. All right, I'm listening. And had this idea for Wrestling with the Law. And he's like, I think people would be interested in hearing that. And I think we'll have some guests and other things on future episodes. Don't want to disclose anything quite yet until we get pinned down. But the original concept was not just my big dumb bald ass talking into a camera for an hour, but getting to the original concept. We'll get there. It'll just be part, like a different episode, right? Next month's episode will be this, and then back to the original concept. But the idea was, let's get as much content as we can. Let's be as entertaining as we can. And, there's a lot of work and thought that goes into it.
Absolutely. And now I use the RSS feed for the ad-free shows, and it's there's a lot of content.
You cannot possibly run out of content if you're on a road trip. There's no way you can run out because it is nonstop.
And this isn't the only show you're on too, right? You're on Sad News Bears. I've seen.
Oh yeah. Bunch of chuckleheads. We all get together and but we're just a delightful bunch of idiots. It's the best way.
And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with
it. We have a good time. It started from we got the group chat and we're all in there, busting each other's balls and talking about wrestling stuff and whatever. It was like, we should do this. Like we could see each other and interact that way. That would be fun. We're like, yeah, why not? Let's give it a try. I don't know how many people listen to it or download it, and we don't really care. We're going to keep doing it because it's fun to see each other and make each other laugh and clown on each other.
There's nothing. Yeah, I mean, me and my buddies, every couple of weeks or so, we'll get on Zoom and we'll just drink and we'll talk bullshit sports and argue and debate and just.
Yep.
There's that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. And why the hell not air it if you're gonna?
Yeah. Right. If people want to watch it and think they're entertained by it, great. Because we got some pretty funny people in the group.
Yeah. Okay. One more question. What topic overall in wrestling or whatever are you looking forward to talking about most when it comes to wrestling with the law?
One thing that I never dug into much, and I think it'll probably be maybe not the next episode, but the one after that is WWF losing the F. Because that happened. It was in the UK courts. It wasn't in the US courts.
Oh, really?
And so I've never spent much time looking into it, but when I did, you don't find much because it's not the US courts. But in my practice, I've got attorneys that I work with quite literally all over the globe. And I've got a lot of UK attorneys that I work with. So that which I can't find online, I'll get from them in whatever systems and databases they have access to. So I'll be able to do a pretty deep dive into it. Because I just want to, how does this happen? If you talk about, and I'll tell you what my suspicions are before I do the research, and we'll find out if I'm right. If it's the similarity of the marks and the relatedness of the services, the marks, of course, WWF and WWF are identical, but one is for charitable fundraising for wildlife and nature, and the other is professional wrestling. And that makes no sense to me how that could possibly be confusingly similar. I don't go trying to donate money to save the pandas in China and accidentally see Triple H climb into a casket with Katie Vick. There's no likelihood of confusion. And if I turned it on, I'd be like, I wonder if these are the guys saving pandas. No. Click, and it's initial interest confusion, which is something in the law, but it's one of those, like when people talk about trademarks and domain names, it's like, look, all you have to do is click back. It's not like you were duped into anything and really went down this rabbit hole on a website because it was the same trademark. Now, if their website is set up and is confusingly similar, that's a different matrix. But if we're talking about, I created MikeFord.com and somebody thought it was the Ford dealership, well, clearly you're going to find it's not. It's just Mike's.
Hey, it's a guy named Mike Ford.
Yeah, it's a guy who likes Ford. So it's silly. And so it's not really that big of a deal. That's a bad example. Ford's famous. I digress. I think that we'll find that it was because it was during the Attitude Era. And so if it had happened at a different time, either before that or after that, a lot of the arguments will be undercut. Mm-hmm. So I think that when you get edgier and you have porn stars as wrestlers and porn stars in hoe trains and this sort of thing, that the wholesome image that the wildlife folks have could be tarnished and somehow harmed by it. I think that's going to be part of it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of agreement or at least settlement that the two parties had at some point, and somehow the WWF ran afoul of it. And so it'll be part trademark, part contractual, I think is what it's going to ultimately. Why they would enter it into a contract, I don't know. So I could be way off on that. But if it had been raised before, and maybe it's when WWF was in a bad position to fight a big legal battle over their, the branding of their entire company, they might have signed something and be like, okay, let's keep the peace because we can't afford to fight this right now. We can't even pay Bret Hart $1 million a year. Let's just make this go away. And then eventually we're like, all right, to hell with it. We got Stone Cold. We're strapped in cash. We're doing all right. Let's fight it. We're gonna have to fight it eventually. So let's just go ahead and fight it now. And ultimately they lost. That's my suspicion, but we'll see. We'll see when I can get through the research.
Yeah, that'll be pretty fascinating one to deep dive into, huh?
Yeah, that'll be a fun one.
Awesome. Cool, man. How do they follow you on Twitter? And obviously, is there a particular day of the month that this drops on, or is it just mid-time?
It's not. I'm trying to shoot for middle of the month. So I think the first one dropped on the 18th, and the second one then the next month on the 16th. So it'll kind of always be around then.
Okay.
It was just, again, by happenstance when my equipment got to me, because I was sitting there at home, all my research was right there, ready to talk about independent contractors, and I didn't have the A+ gear to be able to do it. So that's what I'll shoot for. I think next month's episode, so here in 3 weeks, I'll do a Ask the Gimmick Attorney. So people can ask me legal questions, which is kind of part of what Conrad prompted it in his mind was, here in Huntsville on a local TV station, you'd have these two lawyers, and they're just like doing a public service, like call in, hey, I've got this landlord dispute, what can I do? And he's like, so something like that, but also talk about wrestling stuff. I'm like, yeah, happy to do that. So people can ask about me or whatever. I don't know that I'm that interesting, but at least legal questions they might have, and things about wrestling, or get my opinion on it. And that'll probably be the next episode. So how you can find me is, it's easy, at Gimmick Attorney. That's on Instagram. That's on Twitter. You can go to gimmickattorney.com, and it relocates to my firm bio that goes to Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick, and goes right to my bio. That, interestingly, was a Sad News Bear thing, the
Really?
Gimmick Attorney. So for April 1st, Conrad, because this is what he does, he was like, for our April 1st episode, we're gonna drop, I don't think it was WHW, but it might have been. It was either that or Something to Wrestle. He was like, we're going to drop an episode, and it's just going to be all ads, because people love to tweet and complain about ads.
About the ad.
And so it's just going to be an entire episode of ads. And so he did ads, like shooting promos on all the guys in the group. And so it was like Jeff Jewett's Doo-Doo Trucking, Haul Your Doo-Doo, and Eric Rottencrotch's Pokemon Go, Catch Pokemon with Eric, and all these things. And so mine was Gimmick Attorney. So he's, making fun of me and what I do, and, he'll charge you every 35 seconds, and you can get a $15,000 piece of paper, making up all this nonsense. But before the episode dropped, he texted me and he was like, hey, I'm about to drop this thing tomorrow. You need to look up gimmickattorney.com. And if you can get it and have it redirect to your firm bio. And I'm like, oh boy. All right, I'll do it. So I looked it up. Sure enough, it was available, not surprisingly. And so then, it became my website and how I can tell people to find me.
Hey, that's how you do it, man.
That's how it's done.
Yeah. Rock on, man. No, it's great talking to you, and touch
you too. Good to see you.
Hopefully we can see each other at another StarCast once this whole thing rolls over. And
whenever that might be. I think the hope is, I don't know that he's committed to doing it yet, but I think if there will be another StarCast, it will be Labor Day in Chicago.
Yeah.
Because we had it's a great venue. It's close to where shows happen. And the hotel staff is just A1. They're the best and easiest to work with. So
it's such a good atmosphere. And I tell Conrad this several times. It's like just being at the StarCast and everything like that. You see everybody's happy. Like everybody's enjoying and having a good time. And you mix in that hotel atmosphere. It's intimate, but it's also spacious enough that you can move around and get things done. And
you can set up shows, which when you have roasts of Bruce Pritchard, everybody and their brother wants to be there, and rightfully so. You can set up the shows easily. Meet and greets are easy to deal with. It really is great. And there's plenty of good venues, but when you've got hotel staff that are just on it with everything you need, and they're very responsive, it's the best. It makes running something like that, which again, I don't think people understand how much work goes into it, makes it that much easier. It's incredibly easy.
100%, man. 100%. It's amazing too. And just like from where it started, with Conrad to what's coming now and stuff like that, it's very communal. And I think what you talked about earlier is how you can see his natural passion for it all. And it comes out and on the podcast and in the events that go on. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Hey everybody, this is Dominic D'Angelo. You can follow me at Dominic D'Angelo. You can follow WrestleZone on Twitter at WrestleZone.com, and go to WrestleZone.com for all your wrestling news needs. So Mike, thanks so much, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, guys.